Hey lads, it's the end of the season, so I decided to make a small video to rate the Season 1 experience overall in Dragonflight. I'm starting with Mythic Plus, which is what I'm most excited in the game and what I play most from all the content that's available to us. What I loved about Mythic Plus this season is first that we had various dungeons with various dungeon mechanics, various bosses, and everything was very interestingly made. We also had 8 dungeons, which I guess is a good number, and the length of the season compared to Shadowlands was relatively short, which turned out to be better because you don't get bored from doing the same content over and over again. And although the overall experience was not bad at all compared to Shadowlands, there are many flaws that also need to be mentioned here. First, at the beginning of the season, there were overtuned fights all over the place, many of the dungeons were nerfed, and there were also many overtuned classes, or classes that needed big buffs. When it comes down to healers, if you're not a druid or evoker at the start of the season, you're pretty much in a bad spot. This was eventually fixed when the season went through, which is great because Blizzard showed that they want to improve the game, but it definitely did not feel well at the start of the season, which I guess could have been a turn off for many people who play the game and then just tried the new season, decided it's not worth it. There were also a lot of major design flaws, many bugs which were eventually fixed, but for example, Alkitar Academy was not playable for Restoration Shaman and Priest because they couldn't dispel the poison up until 10.07, which was a very long wait. So blocking people from playing a certain content, especially if you're bugging, is something that we should definitely not see in the game, and that was a very bad decision from Blizzard from my perspective. There were also minor design flaws. For example, Court of Stars always starts with a whole minute, even more, you sitting in a boat and waiting. So if I did Court of Stars 60 times in Season 1, that means that I spent a whole hour just sitting in the damn boat and waiting for the dungeon to start. And there are many examples like that, even in Court of Stars later on, with the same game that you have to do, and flying up in Ruby life pools, or using dragon riding in Orkut Offensive, and the list goes on and on. Many of those things could have been removed from the game, made shorter, as some of them were eventually, but not all of them, which would have made the experience much better. And let's also mention that few of the dungeons were very long. Orkut Offensive is a whole 40 minutes, which feels very bad if you wipe at the end, and some of the dungeons actually had the hardest content at the end, so the longer the dungeon is, the worse it feels when you cannot finish it because you wiped on the last boss. So having shorter dungeons is always great, in my opinion, and some of them were short in this season, but some of them were way too long for my liking. And last but not least, we have to talk about affixes. Now first, this is not an issue for Season 1, but derotating affix each week is a bad design in my opinion, and I'll tell you why. There are weeks which are better to push keys and get score, and there are weeks that you don't want to play. So this is design flaw in the affixes by design, but having the rotation makes it so that you have to invest more time in the game in certain weeks in order to progress, but life happens, as you know, and if you cannot play the game in those specific weeks where you actually want to make progress, that feels really bad because the next 2 weeks, let's say, are bad, you have plenty of time to play, but you don't want to because the affixes are quite bad. I've talked about this before, I know it's not going to be easy, but we know that Blizzard can actually let you pick affixes in the tournament and test realms, so if they can figure out a way to let us pick the affixes and then give us different incentives to pick the different affixes and not always get the easiest possible combination, I think that would be great for the game. And then, one of the most major issues in my mind this season was the Thundering affix. It was a very bad design because you didn't actually feel it as something powerful or something that allows you to change the dungeon, but it would wipe you in many keys, and the things that you're going to remember about Thundering are the times where you were so close to, you know, finishing your key, you did all the boss mechanics just fine, and then at the end, you just got stunned and your key was bricked. So, based on this list, I'm going to give it 6.5 out of 10 points for the Mythic Plus dungeons in Season 1 of Dragonflight. Next on the list is the raiding, which is the other type of content that I particularly engage into, and here I would say several things. First, I really liked that the bosses in the raid were only 8. My guild raids only 2 days per week for 3 hours, so if we have more bosses, for us it's harder to actually go through the whole content, even on farm weeks, and get all the bosses done. At the same time though, all these bosses had various mechanics, they were very different from each other, and there were a lot of original fights. For example, I did not like the Season1 fight, but the all ice thing and going up the spiral of the stairs, that was a very nice design. It didn't feel nice for me to play, based on my playstyle, right? But it was a great boss design. Teros and Kurok were some of my favorite fights, they felt pretty good. Razagat was very original, with the pushback mechanics, with all the ads, etc, right? So the whole design, the whole mechanics, all of this felt really good, and of course there was a little bit more trash than I would like to see. I would just like to see the boss fights, but overall it was a very nice raid and a great design, at least in my opinion. So it would have been almost 10 out of 10, but there are 2 main reasons that I'm going to take a lot of points for. The first one is minor. So 20 people for Mythic, which is what I want to play, is very limiting. My guild is not a big one, so having to find 20 people every raid week is actually quite hard for us, because we have about, let's say, 15 people, so getting the rest 5 with all the lockouts, etc. is very hard. At the same time, our first heroic Razagat kill was only with 10 people, and that felt so good, so I would love to be able to do that for the mythic content as well in the raid. Unfortunately, that's not available right now. However, and this is very personal to me, but I'm going to take at least 3 points from the raid because of the maintenances that Blizzard had to make. Now, this might sound funny to you, but I'm actually into a morning raiding guild. And since the maintenances in the NA servers actually happen in the morning, if they do something other than the Tuesday maintenances, we simply cannot raid. If they do a Wednesday or Thursday maintenance, which is our raiding days, we are just screwed for those 2 days. And there were so many maintenances in Wednesdays and Thursdays, and even Fridays and Mondays this patch, and all of them were just fixing something, right? So if something is not ready, please just don't deploy it. Wait until the next Tuesday and do it then, because if you screw up, then simply we cannot raid. I actually have a friend who works in a very big company and maintains their servers. It's not Blizzard, of course. And we were talking when I told him that we have to wait every Tuesday for a maintenance for them to do whatever they do with their servers. He started laughing and he said, man, it's 2022 and they still have to take down their servers to do a maintenance. That was last year, right? So for him, that was very funny. And I'm pretty sure that first they can optimize this, and second, those extra maintenance were just killing for us this season. So although the raid was pretty good, I would just have to give it 7 out of 10 points for the score over here. And let me also mention that, okay, the maintenance is a screw-up rating for us, but it's very inconvenient for anyone who plays the game during the hours when they actually happen. Next up, I cannot actually rate the PvP because I don't PvP. In my opinion, the entry for a casual PvPer is very high. It's very hard to do. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is actually professions. That was one of the main features in the expansion, and I was very excited about them, but only to be very disappointed at the end. I think I'm only going to mention downsides of the professions, but I was very excited, for example, for the work orders, because that was something that you could use to interact with the system. My main is alchemy and enchanting, and I've done 0 work orders since the beginning of the expansions. They're just not there, right? They're just not available. And even if you say, oh, you picked the wrong professions, why should professions be different, right? I have ults with different professions, and the things are not much better there either. At the same time, you have to farm all those profession points and invest them into different specializations and branches, etc. And all that could happen there is, first, there's no catch-up mechanics for ults. So if you are behind, you're basically screwed. And second, if you invest into the wrong branches, you're also screwed, because there are enchants that you can just not reach to make, or potions that you cannot make, etc, etc. And in many cases, even if you put the points into the correct places to make whatever you want to make, let's say that's an enchant, it is actually cheaper to go and buy it on the auction house because you're relying to get a proc for the best quality item, and if it doesn't happen, you have to spend more regions, and then that turns out to be more expensive than just going and buying it on the auction house. So even from the perspective of having a profession and doing something for yourself, that's not viable right now because it is easier to just go and buy it on the auction house. Why bother with points and crafting it yourself and praying for procs, etc. And then you get the crafted items, which are supposedly going to be very, very good. Yes, they are, but first they're ridiculously expensive. Some of the materials in the beginning were ridiculously expensive. Some of the embellishments were very hard to get, the flavor pocket for example. And my paladin is actually on a very low population server. So I wanted to craft 2 items, I put out a work order for them, somebody did them at a relatively low item level, but then I cannot put another crafting order to recraft the item into a higher item level. And since there's nobody on the server, no matter how much I spammed in trade chat looking for somebody to craft the higher item levels for me, nobody would show up, so those were just 2 dead items for my paladin because I could have never updated them to the quality that I would like. So interacting with that system was basically nothing but trouble for me. There was nothing fun to do there, and it didn't feel rewarding at all. So unfortunately, as hyped as I was to, let's say, have an ult, which is just going to be a profession specialist into something, I'll just have to give it 1 out of 10 points. Although they had good intentions, I don't think they worked out the way that they could have. And the last point is to mention everything else, which is basically questing, world quests, content, interactions with the game, etc. And there are a lot of positives there. So first, we had a lot of content. Compared to Shadowlands, which we had basically a year of nothing, Dragonflight has been great from that perspective because we got a lot of new stuff, a lot of updates in these small patches, etc., which felt really, really great. There were a lot of new additions to the game, like the dragon riding quests, which get boring at some point, but when you're rewarded for, let's say, doing a quest and they give you 500 gold, I was actually going around and doing those, and they were relatively fun. Same with the climbing quests and stuff. The one things that I actually did not like were, for example, the feast. You had to wait 3.5 hours for that to happen, and if you miss it, then you have to wait forever to get another one. And then the whole interaction with that system alone was very boring because you go there, you click a button, you wait for the chat to give you a new task. And there were even an occasion where there were so many people around it that I didn't get enough tasks to actually finish the quest to do 5 tasks in one go. So I had to wait 3.5 hours to do that again, which was very, very annoying. I'm also not a fan of the Forbidden Reach style of play where you just have to run around and kill rares, and basically whether or not if you're there, that it actually doesn't matter because there are, let's say, 50 people who are killing the mob, so you just have to fly there fast enough to tag it and get whatever you want to get from it. Or if you're alone, it takes forever to kill a 15 million health mob, which also doesn't feel great. But I guess the Iskera Vault was relatively interesting to do. If it was not connected with the keys for which we had to run around and kill the rares, it could have been probably even better, but it was something different. The ring that they added into the Forbidden Reach was also a relatively interesting addition to the game. So I think at the end of the day, the rest of the content, the world quests, the red farming, the dragon riding, all of that was great, so that actually deserves a relatively high grade. And this will be my final list with my final grades. Let me know if you agree, let me know what you think, and let me know what are your grades. And for the end of this video, let's give one final grade for the whole season overall in Dragonflight. I'm going to give it 7 out of 10, which compared to Shadowlands is very, very high, because there it would be like 1 or 2 probably. There was nothing good in Shadowlands in my opinion. And it's also worth mentioning there were few things in Season 1 of Dragonflight which, if they were clean, that would probably be like 9 or 10 out of 10. Specifically the maintenances, the thundering, etc. So let me know if you agree, let me know if you disagree, and I'm really looking forward to Season 2 because as of right now, it's promising to have even higher grade than what I'm giving for Season 1, but time will tell if we're right or wrong. So, see you soon with some more videos coming up in Season 2 of Dragonflight.